It's processing. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I am joined by a very good friend who I'm just so excited to talk to, Genevieve Graham. Would you like to tell people a little bit about who you are and what it is that you write?
Yes, and thank you, Julia, for having me on here. And Julia's been over on my Facebook page when I've been talking with other authors, and I love working with you, Julia, so I'm so happy to be here. I am up in Canada. I am up in Nova Scotia, and I write, basically I write Canadian historical fiction, telling stories about stories in Canadian past that we don't actually talk a lot about. Even in Canada, we don't really learn. I remember sleeping through history class and
Ironic, I love it.
yeah, and I was never a historian. I was never really interested at all. I think we up here we taught more about British history and U.S. history than our own. So there's a lot of stories coming out that I'm having a blast learning all about and sharing it with so many audiences, and U.S. audiences are interested too. So I'm very excited to share.
Well, we're definitely going to touch on sort of different aspects of history and stories that maybe we aren't as familiar with, because I think that's one of the wonderful, wonderful things about your book. But perhaps you can tell us a little bit about Letters Across the Sea, because I
Sure.
think it's just something people are going to absolutely love.
Thank you. Yes, I started off wanting to write about the largest ethnic riot in Canadian history. And what it was it was set in 1933 after Hitler became chancellor in January and then set up the Enablers Act in 1933 in March. He took over all the media, basically. He was a propaganda king, and he took over what anybody could say over in Germany, but also over here. And it was interesting to me at the time, Toronto was called Toronto the Good because it was run by a group called the Orangemen. The Protestants had very strict rules. They even would have padlocks on the swing sets on the weekends or on Sundays. So very strict, hence the name Toronto the Good. But the whole city was simmering with anti-Semitism that had come over during all the the misinformation that was coming across. Was leading to a lot of anti-Semitism. And it was also during the Great Depression. So what I did leading up to this story was I was showing how the families of that time were getting through it, but how they needed entertainment. They needed free entertainment for the families. And it usually ended up at a baseball diamond. So in August 1933, there was a semifinals game between two teams. One was called St. Peter's, which was mostly Protestant, and the other was called Harvard Playground. And at the time when they were going in, the whole city would have, they had signs in windows that would say, "Help wanted, Jews need not apply." Right on the Toronto beaches, there was a sign that said, "No dogs or Jews." And they even had gangs around the street called swastika clubs that were causing trouble with the Jewish population. Of course, the Jewish boys had their own gangs as well. So things were getting hotter and hotter. And on this night in August 16th, 1933, they at the end of the game, someone on one of the hillsides, and there were thousands of people watching, somebody unfurled a giant banner with a swastika in the middle of it. And the whole crowd went wild. There were men there with baseball bats, sawed off iron pipes, bricks. They'd all come prepared for this. And for the next 4 hours, downtown Toronto was covered by 10,000 fighting men. Just everything came to a head. And that was called the Christie Pitts Riot. That was the first thing I wanted to write about. And initially I thought that was the whole story, but it wasn't.
It never is.
It never is. It's those wonderful rabbit holes you dive into and you go, oh, that needs to be in the story too. One of my main characters, Max, is Jewish, and he was at the Christie Pitts Riot, but he's a very, he believes in the cause and he wants to go to war. He's a doctor as well, and he wants to fight the injustice. So he enlists, but he ends up with a group called the Sea Force, which is a group of men assigned to garrison duty, which is not combat duty. They were not trained for combat and they were not armed for combat. But in 1941, they were sent to Hong Kong to defend it against any Chinese forces or Japanese forces that might be coming in. And they were assured, you don't need to be trained. It's not a big deal. The Japanese have been fighting China since 1937. they're worn out. There's hardly any of them. If any attack, there might be 5,000 and they'll be older guys undertrained. Don't worry about a thing. So the Canadians were shipped down there and not expecting anything. But of course, December 7th rolled around and the Japanese went after Pearl Harbor and then Manila and then Hong Kong. And the Canadians were forced into a 3-week battle all through Hong Kong, where they were not trained, but they did amazing defensive work against not 5,000, but 50,000 hardened Japanese warriors. It culminated on Christmas Day, 1941, with the Canadians' last stand, they called it, where they had a big battle. And throughout these 3 weeks, 260 men were killed, Canadians. But this is the only battle in World War II history that was 100% a failure, because if they weren't killed, they were taken as POWs by the Japanese, who had no interest in following the Geneva Convention. And those men were subjected to the next 3 years and 8 months of slave labor, brutality, beheadings, and starvation. So the whole story of the Battle of Hong Kong and then the Canadian POWs in Japan is something that we never talk about. We know very little about. And when I discovered it, I just thought, this needs to be told. So I was really excited to be able to include that in the story as well. I do love to write about Canadian military history because it's another thing we don't talk about. We talk about the American and the British forces, but the Canadians are in there too. And it's nice to find out more about that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I'll admit my own ignorance. Most of my knowledge of what happened in Canada during the war is through a British lens. It's through the training of pilots and soldiers and, forces from around what we now know as the Commonwealth. And I'm even shaky enough that I don't know at what point Canada is designated what status within the Commonwealth. So I have to admit, I'm coming to this very, very fresh. And one of the things that I found so compelling about this book was not only the incredibly compelling characters and the way that they're drawn together throughout the book and pulled apart. And it's a really wonderful, long arcing story. And I think because, I've recently have tended to write about kind of a few months. I've done a compressed timeline, and you're really dealing with the course of somebody's life, which I think is wonderful. But it's also something so new to somebody like me. So I'm fascinated to hear that you found out more about the Battle of Hong Kong in the process of writing this book and in the process of figuring out what the story was going to be, because it is such a pivotal part of this novel, and it's so wonderfully written, even as difficult as it can be. And I'm sure it was difficult to write, and it's difficult to read as well, but it's compelling and it's really harrowing.
Thank you. Yes, I had no intention of writing anything about that. In fact, I didn't know that it had even happened. What I knew is that after 1933, with these men that were caught up in all of this fighting and anti-Semitism, that they were going to want to go to war. They were going to want to fight it. But I had read so many World War II stories, and I wanted to do something different, something I knew nothing about. Again, I'm not a historian, so everything is new to me. And I didn't know anything about the Pacific Theater. And I definitely didn't know if Canadians were involved. And when I did find that out, it was perfect for me. There were 1,985 men that were sent down there, and they were declared unfit for service by the time they were sent. And we know nothing about that. So yeah, I love discovering new things, just happen to discover them, happen to fall into new stories that can work out.
Absolutely. And then on the other side, you have a story that's going on simultaneously back in Toronto. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, the story is basically about, well, there's, in my stories, there's usually a romance, because I feel like in order, and you know this, in order for historical fiction to work, it needs to have a very strong emotional core. You need people to connect to those characters. You need them to love them or hate them. You need them to be passionate about them. And the one emotion that can always pull you together is a love story. So all of my books include that. So in this one, it was interesting because I had Max Dreyfus lived on one side of the street and his family was Jewish. And Molly Ryan lived on the other side. She was Protestant, daughter of a policeman. And they had been raised together and they were best buddies. And she was best buddies with his sister. And it was all very close and fun for the families. But then he came back after 4 years of university and she saw not a little boy anymore. She had quite feelings for Max, and they were returned. But of course, they were not allowed because she was Protestant, he was Jewish. They were being very careful about all of that. And when he went off to war, everything was cut right off there. So when Max went off to war, Molly had always loved to write, but she never really took herself seriously. She had to work through the Great Depression. She held down jobs like working in a sweatshop at Eaton's and working in a greengrocer in the back room. So she did a lot of jobs that she hated so she could finance her education to get into journalism eventually. And Max had always told her, you should write, you write beautifully. And she finally took that seriously, and she did go to journalism school. So I follow her working in downtown Toronto, learning the trade and becoming quite a good writer. And she ends up discovering a lot more about the war from that side of it, which was interesting. Through the story, I had learned a lot about fake news that was happening back then. And so she was caught up in the middle of that and trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. And she was also learning about POW camps from this side of the sea, and learning about what these guys might have been going through at the time. So I did want her to have the side of it as a journalist, and to be able to sense it all and feel it, and then to have that deep connection to Max. So it really, really mattered to her.
Absolutely. One of the things, just as a side note, that I really loved about this book was I read a lot of stories about journalists, and having been a journalist, I feel like I'm a little hypersensitive to it when it feels off to me.
Sure.
One of the things I really loved about this book was she gets into the newsroom and she has to really work her way through it. And you get the sense of what it's like being a cub reporter. You get the sense of what it's like as you're slowly getting little breaks. You're finding what it is that you're really good at, how you can attract your editor's attention, how you can kind of use your sources and build and build. And it's a slow process. She's not the star journalist the moment that she gets to the newspaper. She really does have to work for it.
Yes, and she recognized that right away. And I think the nice strong thing about Molly was how she was always able to learn from everything that was going on around her. She was never one to accept defeat, no matter what she was having to be put through. So yeah, and then she had a friend in the office. Ian was he was a very kind man, very smart man, and they were friends right off the bat. So he was able to sort of take her hand and lead her through all of the difficulties that she would have. But at the end, yes, cream rises to the top, and she found her spot up there. So I was proud of her. It's always fun with characters to watch them excel, right? And you know that they've got it in them as the author, you know it's there, but you have to sort of tease it out, because if we wrote a story that was too easy, what would be the point in reading it? It has to have challenges for all of them, and to watch them bloom that way. I love watching that part of the character development.
Well, and it must be an additional challenge, because on one side you have this very harrowing story of a man who's going through just the worst conditions in a POW camp, and you see elements of that. So when we're back in Toronto, we also need to feel as invested in what's happening with her. So you have to build in some of that conflict and some of that uncertainty with her as well. So as you say, it can't be too easy. Otherwise, we want to look over here. We don't want to look over here.
Exactly. And part of the story, after Max is taken as a POW, he sort of has to drop off the pages for a while. So we don't really know if he's a POW. We don't know. I probably just let out a big spoiler there, but we don't really know what's going on with him. And so
There's a
he
lot more to the book than just this. Don't worry.
That's right. That's right. So he's gone from the story. And so yeah, she's taken center stage. And so we're able to see a lot more things through her perspective, which is great.
Yeah. I'm really curious about the experience of women during World War II, and the women in Toronto in particular. It sounded like it was a very difficult time in a lot of ways, not just for the families, but also for basic needs and essentials. How do you get a job? How do you feed yourself? Can you talk a little bit about those details that you wove in to sort of create that environment?
Sure. Well, part of what you read was set in 1933. So that was during the Depression. So there was a great deal of need for everyone during that time. And watching the characters try to scrape together meals and rations and basically make a life out of nothing, because Molly comes from a family of 7, and all of them are holding down jobs trying to bring in food. But the Great Depression was very difficult that way. when you get into World War II, there was lots of rationing, but all of Toronto, all of Canada was a part of the war effort. Um, the women that were behind, they had victory gardens in every yard. They had knitting organizations. They had all different places where you would donate, things to be contributed into the cause and to help overseas. It was a very, very busy time. There was also during the war, there were in Canada the Wrens, which were the now I wish I could remember what it's down for, but it's the Royal Canadian Navy, but it's the women's side, and how they would do their own work during the war, and whether it's administrative or driving cabs or anything like that, the women were working very hard up here during World War II.
Yeah.
Through both wars, really. World War I, the only thing the women here were allowed to do was go to the front line as nurses. That's something else that I'm researching for another book. But in World War II, they were everywhere. They were very busy.
So you really see women's roles expanding throughout the war. And then, we do get to know Molly's life after the war a little bit as well, and see that difference from 1933 to post-war.
Yeah. It was, it's nice to see the development, not only, in her job and her confidence that way, but as a person, and to know that she does have more rights and that she can stand up for herself.
Mm-hmm.
It helps them make them all stronger.
Absolutely. How do you go about researching the detail for your books? Because there's a lot in this book, and it is a book that spans, as we've said, a number of years and a number of different events. How do you approach that?
So when I start writing anything, I start with what I consider to be the black and white photo. So if I want to work on World War II Toronto, I will sort of take a snapshot in my mind, and then I will learn the basics all about the city at that time, what was going on politically and what was going on physically with that. That's the black and white photo. And then after I will take out everything I can from the library, all the nonfiction that they will let me have, and then I will read as much of that as I can. But to be honest, I'm really not good at reading the old kind of nonfiction and things like that. So I get as much out of that as I can. I form a larger picture for myself, but it's when I start going online and I start going into blogs that are written by specialists or being referred to different kinds of specific books, or at one point I liked working with reenactors because they are so full of details, and of course diving into archives and getting letters and journals and all of those things that contribute to it. And then what I've started to do lately, I started this with the Forgotten Home Child, but I did it for this one as well. I go into their Facebook pages because there are groups that work on these things. Like for the Forgotten Home Children, they have a Facebook page of thousands of people who are there for the explicit purpose of connecting people to their ancestors and educating the public about who the children were. And so I was able to do that with the Hong Kong vets as well, because they have a somewhat smaller but an active descendant page as well. So I was able to go on and meet some of the people there and get their actual personal stories about their fathers, their grandfathers, and be able to incorporate all of those into the story. So it's I love getting into what I call colorizing the photo, taking all of those little details and bringing everything to life. And I think it takes all different directions, as you know, when you're doing research. I'm not an organized person, so I sort of take things from all over the place, and I write myself pages and pages and pages of notes as I read from all different things, and then I will go through them at the end, and I'll make sure what needs to be incorporated and what doesn't. But I think I take information from everywhere. It was really interesting when I finished writing this book. After I was all done, I actually was talking to my future son-in-law, and I said to him, he's in the Navy here, and I wanted to tell him what this story was because he's interested in military stories. And he said, "Oh, Hong Kong, yeah, my great uncle was there." What? And he said, "Yeah, he's actually one of the 5 that are still alive."
Wow,
What? And
really?
he would tell me, he said, "Oh yeah, when we were growing up, he would tell us stories like he was always, his family line, the men are quite slender." And he said that when they were in the POW camps, the guys that were overweight or thicker were dying faster because their bodies weren't used to having so little food, I guess. But the men that were built very slender were surviving the longest. And, little tiny details like that are fabulous for my work, for contributing. But then to discover I actually was, not related, but close to being related to one of
Soon.
the yeah, it was pretty neat. And actually I did get in contact with him. He's 97 years old, and he asked me for a copy of the book. And yeah, it's been pretty great.
That's so interesting. I love the idea of going to those descendant pages because we are talking about history that's close enough that there would be some
Yeah.
familial memory still there. And presumably families still have, artifacts or stories. I know some families have done oral histories or, written books about family history. So that's a fantastic resource. And then to find out that you have a real connection to somebody who was there is incredible.
Yeah, that was really neat. And the really neat thing about going on those Facebook pages for research is that these people are so passionate. They really, really want to share these stories, and it makes it easy for me. It's an amazing experience to work with people who care so much about this subject. It was new to me, but it's all they know, and so they're just feeding me all the time. So, like I said, and like there's so many ways to research. So this one, I only discovered this method for the last book, and I'm going to be doing it every time now because it's just so interesting.
So I'm wondering if now, because The Forgotten Home Child was a phenomenal bestseller, and this book is an instant bestseller, we know already, which is very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank
But I'm
you.
wondering whether people are going to start reaching out to you and saying, I think you might want to interview this group of people and maybe write a book about that.
That would be nice. I'm getting tons and tons of requests for things that my readers would like to read next. So if they want to send me contacts, that would be great. There's so many themes that are being thrown at me, and I have so many I want to write, and I actually write a book a year. So I'm planning on getting to, if not all, at least most of these ideas over the next few years. But um, it's some of them, and when you find history that intrigues you, you also have to make sure that it's a story that can be molded into a story, because there are moments in time that are interesting, but how do you make that into an entire story unless you can put in other moments of history? But there's a lot more to it than just finding an interesting point in history. So I'm sorting through a lot of ideas all the time.
Yeah. Well, if you can have them prepackaged with a little bit of research and some contact, why not?
Yes, people
Strengthens the case.
exactly. Send me the stuff, then I can get to work on it.
It's interesting you say that it's not just a moment in history. You need to be able to build a story out because I think one of the things that I've talked to some people about before is, and I think is interesting, is where is the line between the story and the history? And how do you make sure that those are kind of working in parallel and not competing with each other? I think if you're going too far into the story without any regard for the history, it doesn't feel authentic, but it's possible to overload things as well. So how do you find that sweet spot right in the middle?
Absolutely. And I think that's sort of one of the most important parts about what we're doing, I think. Because to me, the most important aspect of the entire story is the character, because the character is made of all of the research, it's made of all the different factors. If we are researching part of history where it's, political and fashion and food and technology and communication, all of those things, those research bits are what form the characters. So to me, the character is the most important part. So how much does the character actually know? In my first book, Tides of Honor, I wrote about the Halifax explosion, which was the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. And it was right here where I live in Halifax. Incredible story that we really don't talk about enough. And after the explosion, which immediately killed 1,900 people, the very next day there was a massive blizzard. It was in December that this happened. When I was researching, I knew exactly how many inches of snow had fallen, and I knew the exact air temperature. I knew so many little facts.
Mhm.
But my character, Danny Baker, all he knew was the snow was getting into his boots and he was freezing and he needed the coat and he needed the blanket and he needed all these things. But he didn't know how many inches and he didn't know the temperature. So the difference is I know it. So I can inflict that kind of outside effects on him, but
Yes.
he can only speak in his mind of what he is experiencing. And I think that's the difference because we get into so many amazing parts of history that we want to share, right? We learn so many things, but it's so easy to list them all off and include everything. And it's not, somebody said, well, that's just showing off. And I said, I don't think it's showing off. I think it's excitement because we learn so much. But there is that line. Our characters don't know all of that stuff. We do. And that gives us that great grounding for building them. But we have to make sure that they can only talk about what they know.
Absolutely. Well, and there's, as you say, there are elements of your research that you can use to put your characters through their paces, but at the same time, you do have to hold back enough to then allow them to live out the story that you want to tell as well. So you do have to kind of balance all of those things and keep the momentum going. And I think that's another thing. As you say, it's not showing off, but it's very easy to get bogged down in things if you're not careful.
It is. Like I had an example of if my character was walking along the street, uh, what she's seeing there. Okay, if she's seeing shops, she needs to go and see what's behind the window and what's in that shop window. Well, of course, I have to research everything. She's looking at me and saying, "So tell me what's in the window." So I have to go and research it, and I know everything that's in that window, and I know when it was made, and I know what it costs, and I know all the things about it. But what she really wants is maybe that one teapot. So I know everything in the window, and she wants to know about that teapot. So I also need to know about that, and I need to know what's going to go in it, where she's going to buy what's going to go in it, how she uses it when she gets home. So all these little tiny things are what she needs to know. And I think that's what makes historical fiction so much fun. Is it's we are basically creating the characters out of our research, and I love that process. I love building it in, but we learn so much that we don't need to learn. Except I think that we do need to learn. I think we still need to fill our minds, right? You and I need to be in a position where we know more than that character. We just can't let her know everything.
Exactly. It's funny, my family and I have a running joke of, what's the 55-minute presentation with a PowerPoint that you could give at the drop of a hat? And I think historical fiction authors are absolutely those people. So do you want a presentation about rationing? I could give you 55 minutes on rationing. You want to talk about wartime fashion? None of my books have been terribly, terribly dependent on wartime fashion, but you know what? I've got the research books for it and I've done the reading.
Exactly, exactly. It's it's a learning experience for us for sure.
Absolutely. Is there a challenge with this book with kind of watching your characters go from essentially children to later on in their lives and that process that they go through? Do you find that more challenging than a more compressed timeline?
I don't find it more challenging. I find it more interesting. Normally, when we write or when I write, although I did this with the home children too, I started as children. Normally, we will see a character who's an adult and we can see they're already mostly processed. They're mostly grown up and ready to go. But this way, we can see them as their children and we start from their innocence and their learning about everything that's around them. And that's what's building them and making them into that person. So for me, it's almost, I don't know, it almost makes it easier because I grow with them.
Mhm.
So as a child, they won't need to know certain things, but as they grow up, they need to learn, and that's when I learn. So for me, it's an interesting arc. And then the home children, I did from a child right to the age of 98 years old. So it was the whole development was I loved it. I loved doing that.
We're seeing some love for that book in the comments.
Oh, that's
We have
nice.
some very very excited readers. In terms of the comments, you guys, if you do have questions, more than happy to ask them if we're able to get to those. And I think maybe we'll do one now because we are sort of talking about research and the writing process. Kay wants to know, how long did it take you to do your research and then finally write this book?
Well, I don't do it that way. The book process for me is about 8 months, and I start off with the basic knowledge, um, but then as I research, that's when the characters start to form. So I don't know all of the research at the beginning, and I think Julie is probably the same way. Is that we know what's where it's coming, but we don't know everything all at once. So as I keep writing, as I develop the characters and keep writing about them, that's when I learn more. So it's all growing at the same time, and their story is growing as I fill in the research blanks, if that
So,
makes sense.
so I know you started with, you wanted to write about this riot, this event. Did you sit there and say, okay, I'm starting the research on this, and then the characters develop along the way, and then you get a stronger sense of what the plot's going to be, and you do more, because that sounds very familiar to me.
Mhm.
So I'm
Well,
glad to find somebody else who does this.
yeah, that's how it is. And I think it's, they say as an author, you are either a pantser or a plotter.
Yes.
And you're either writing from the seat of your pants or you have it all plotted out. And I am a wannabe plotter. I will never be one. I've tried, but I am just not organized that way. So yes, everything I wanted to write about the riot, the Christie Pitts riot. I wanted that to be the center. But the more I learned about these people and the more I developed the characters, the more I realized I can't leave them here. Max wants to go to war. Max needs to go to war. And what do I need to do there? And that's when that other door opened, another window opened for me to look through and to start investigating. But yeah, I had a vague idea that I wanted to include World War II, but it wasn't until I had created this first part of the story that Max said to me, we're not done, right? You've got to get back in there and read more so that I can do more.
Yeah, there's a whole nother part to this book you haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah.
So
It's
interesting.
it was an interesting thing, and I was hoping that it would work. It was kind of hard to make it work because the difference was 1933 to 1941. So somewhere in there I had to make something happen, and I had to make it believable and bridge it. And I think it worked the way we did it, but it is a challenge when you're taking two different things. But I like to, when I'm writing about a period in history, I like to include as many valid, important points as I can. Um, when I wrote about the Klondike Gold Rush and at the mountain's edge, I wrote about a rock slide that had buried the town. That was 2 years later after the Klondike Gold Rush, but I really wanted to include it, so I had to build onto that. It was unexpected, but I thought it needed to be there. So that was another example. It just had to come in at the very end.
Mhm. Absolutely. Uh, we have several questions about the two fabulous covers behind you and
Oh
why
yeah.
you have two covers for this book. So perhaps we can talk a little shop, because I think people are always curious about the behind the scenes. So we have on one side with great red shoes and a red dress, the Canadian cover, right? Oh, otherwise, yeah, there you go. And then we have the US cover with the blue dress on the other
Yes.
side, correct? Okay, great. How is it having two covers, and how did this end up happening? Because I think people are curious.
This is the very first time it's happened for me. It's and I was somewhat surprised by it. When you've probably heard this before, but authors have no say over covers. Sometimes I have a little input. Yeah, we can have a little input. Like I said, I like that shade of red. I can say things like that. Or if it's completely wrong, I do have a little input, but mostly that comes from the publisher and their designer. So I'm never really sure what I'm going to see. Fortunately, Simon and Schuster is incredible with their covers, and I love them. So I saw the red dress, and I knew what that was going to be, and I love it. I think it's what she's holding is a letter, and it works with the theme. Then most of my sales, until the home child, most of my sales have been across Canada, but now the United States is starting to get interested in these stories. And when Simon and Schuster in the States got it, I think they wanted to follow more of a US marketing trend. I think it has to do a lot with marketing trends, same as titles of books. Those follow trends as well.
Yeah.
So I think that came because they said, I read something about there weren't as many historical fiction ones going on in the US as there are here, which I'm not sure. That seems wrong to me, but that's sort of what I'd heard. And so that the fact that the US covers had more of what you see in the blue dress of the back of the woman, the faraway scene, and the airplanes in the back. That's what they wanted. It was just a whole different trend that they're following than what we have up here. And, I should probably say that, well, there's sort of a 50-50 preference rate on these two covers, but I do have a lot of Canadian readers that are saying, can I buy the American cover? It's prettier. So it's, it's pretty even.
I like it. Well, it's funny you mentioned about the airplane, because I have a book, The Whispers of War, that for the hardcover, it has a completely different paperback cover. So if you look at the hardcover US edition, it's sort of this turquoisey green that fades out, and it's a woman walking away framed in a window with two other women sitting there. And for the British cover, they did a completely different treatment of the same scene. So you have the two women at the window, except everything's sort of an orangey color. And there's a London street scene and a Spitfire. just so you really know you're in World War II. I think it's one of those things where you want readers to be able to immediately identify what it is that they're picking up. So, are we going to be in World War II or sort of adjacent eras? Are we going to be in the 50s with big dresses and, pearls? Are we in the Victorian era? It's a marketing tool as well. So I think, publishers are always looking to fit the book to the potential audience that they are trying to target.
Definitely. And as I said, it's not just the covers, it's the title as well, because
Yeah.
we need to indicate where we are in time. And I've come up with titles that my editor just laughs at, because sometimes they sound like horror movies, or sometimes they sound like romance or whatever. And they're not really indicative of what I'm actually writing about, but I think they sound nice. And they have their own way of doing it, and they always end up doing it right. So I just I just leave them to it.
How do you do with coming up with title? Well, how did you do with coming up for a title for this book? Because I know I have not been the solo author of any of my historical fiction titles because I never can get it quite right.
It's hard. I don't know. It's because it's like summing up the entire book in 4 or 5 words or 2 words or something. I have had 2 titles that I did by myself, and I was very proud of. Actually,
As you should be.
3. I did 3 out of 6 of them. So, Tides of Honor, Come From Away, and Promises to Keep Her All. Those are my babies. But after that, I would put in ideas, and it's really, really hard. And sometimes they would come to me like Letters Across the Sea. We decided on that title when we were still forming the book, really, and we weren't sure how many letters were actually going to be in it. A lot of people are thinking that it was going to be more of a Guernsey literary potato peel, with everything being letters, and it's not. So it's kind of a blend. But yeah, I'm sort of batting 50% on titles so far. I don't. The next one that's coming, I have no idea. I have zero idea.
I thought I had it with this next book, which is The Last Dance of the Debutante, continuing apparently my own personal trend of books with last in the title. But I thought I had it. It had a different title beforehand, and it was called The Last Debutante, and an author is publishing a book a little bit earlier than me called The Last Debutante. So we actually went through a title change, and I'm very happy with where it ended up. I think it works really well for the book, but I really thought I had one with that one, and
it's funny when that happens. With my first book, with Tides of Honor, I thought we had such a beautiful cover, and we were just about to release it. And then we looked in the Costco catalog up here, and Jennifer Robson had the exact same photo in her book. And so we went into emergency mode, and we had to find a new cover and make it all different. But that was scary.
And the rule is whoever publishes it first gets it. So.
And actually, it was great because that's how I got to meet Jennifer. I wrote to her and I said, "Oh, really nice cover you got there."
Do you want to see my mock-up? That's so funny. It happens, and sometimes it ends up leading to a friendship. I actually met Jennifer through you, so there you go. It all comes around in a circle.
Yes, she's great. She's a lot of fun.
She is. So we have a couple more questions I would love to ask you on people's behalf. Joanne asks, do you have a favorite book or character from all of your books?
It changes all the time. For the longest time, actually, it's every single book, I always tend to prefer the male characters. I don't know why. Maybe it's because when I'm researching, I find a particularly handsome actor that I believe would be good for it. And then I have to research very hard by watching all of his movies. But for some,
it's only right.
Well, it's hard work, but somebody's got to do it. And True. So I do like, I always connect more to the male characters for whatever reason that is. And my first favorite was, for the longest time, was my first character in Tides of Honor, which was Danny Baker. He was, a tough guy, fragile inside kind of a thing. He went through World War I. And then Danny held the first place all the way until last year when I was writing about the home children, and Jack in that story took my heart. But Max right now, Max in Letters Across the Sea, is he's right up there. I'd say he's my favorite right now.
He's an interesting one because he is a very noble man in his own way, and he goes through a lot of things, and sort of certain aspects of him change, but certain core values are very much still there throughout the entire book, which I think is a testament to the character.
Yeah, and I think you have to really, with a lot of my books, they've gone through PTSD of some form. And if you picture a man who's been basically tortured for almost 4 years and starved, and getting tropical parasites through him and watching his friends be killed and all these things, that's going to change a man. But you're right, the core of him, the heart of him is still a good man, but he's got a lot of damage, and you have to sort through all of that and find the light for him. You have to find a way through for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here from Sharon, who wants to know if any of the last names used were real. Are you drawing from real people in your life? Where are you coming up with your names? Because this is another thing I'm really bad at. In fact, if you guys could see all the titles back here, you'll see most of my characters' last names. Because I just steal authors' names. I'm sure I will use your name at some point.
That's good. That's good. I love to see my name up there. I just go through census lists, and I don't want the number one name of the year. I'll go down lower, and I want one that I like. And it's silly sometimes how I choose it. A book that I'm working on now, I originally had one of the characters' name was Nicholas, but it really annoys me to do the possessive form of a word with an S at the end. So I don't like that. So I had to change his name.
It's funny the little things that bother us when we're
yeah. But in this book, no, I didn't know. I didn't use any names that I knew in particular. I went through the census and different listings that I found online. In The Forgotten Home Child, I did. There's a family, an older couple named the Cogans, and those are my grandparents. That was just their name, not who they were, but I used their name. I do like to use family names when I can.
That's a good idea.
It's fun. The next one that's coming out is going to be using my grandfather's name and his brother. So that's fun to kind of farm those names. Can't write about my grandmother because her name was Genevieve. So I think that would be a little bit self-serving. So I can't do that one. But I've used her middle name before. So
it's funny you mention the census, because I was my family and I do a family movie night, because we're in sort of soft lockdown here, where restrictions are lifting, but we're not quite there yet. So we do a family movie night, and then we come together afterwards and have a phone call and talk about the movie. And we decided we've been doing very wonderful but heavy Kurosawa films, so we decided we're going to do something fun. So we watched Bull Durham for the first time for me and my brother-in-law, and my dad's seen it before, and my mom had seen it, I think. And so I was reading a little bit about it afterwards, because I really enjoyed the movie. And I guess the writer director had chosen the name Crash Davis, which is the main character, out of an old baseball sort of record book from, I think, the 1930s. And on the first day of filming, his assistant ran up and said, Crash Davis is on the phone. Turns out the guy was still alive, and wanted to know, do I get the girl in the end? So he was able to kind of talk him through it and introduce him on set. And it was a really nice story. But I kind of thought, oh, that would be a bit of a moment.
That would be awkward, but it sure would be fun, wouldn't it, to be able to do that? In Letters Across the Sea, actually, I did use some names of the actual boys that were in the baseball team back then. I was able to find the roster. So I've got the real names, but then of course I had to throw in Max, who was not on the team. So it's all mixed up in there. But I try when I can to use the right names. And once in a while, if you can run into a real life historical figure, it's fun to include them in it too. But it's hard to do that when they could still be alive, or they've got family that are following, and you have to be exactly right if you're going to do any kind of details on a historical person.
You do. You have to be very, very careful. And I have to admit, I've shied away from that for the most part, because I am concerned about that, remaining family who have a very close connection to that person. Yeah. So it is tricky territory sometimes.
It is. I admire people who write biographies or historical fiction biographies. That's a challenge I am not ready to face.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Diane wants to know, what does the day in the life of your writing look like?
Yeah.
Is there
Well,
a consistent day?
the, my days are all the same. And the question is during COVID or before COVID or whatever, it's always been the same. Doesn't matter to me. Um, I will just have breakfast and I'm up here all day. Um, and well, I've started to use the treadmill again, which is probably really good. But mostly I am stuck here at this desk. And it's not because I have to be here, it's because I want to be here and I totally lose track of time. My husband appears at the end of the day with a glass of wine and says, "You've been up here long enough. It's time to come outside and re-meet your family." Um, but I just I love doing this. So this is what I want to do. But during COVID, it's changed, hasn't it? You know this because I do more promotion than I do writing these days. I have I'm most of my mornings, instead of going through emails from my editor and stuff, I'm going through Instagram and reading messages and questions from reviewers and from readers. And it's turned into like 11 o'clock at night. I'm still getting requests from people. I put out on Instagram yesterday and I said, I can't go into the stores to sign books, but I have book plate stickers and who wants one? And I was flooded at 11 o'clock last night. I was still answering them saying, okay, give me your address. Okay. And it just went on and on and on. And but it's all part of it. I did like when I had more time to write than to promote, but the promotion game is fun too. You meet a lot of people. You and I, well, you might be doing this, but I never would have been doing interview shows on my page unless I had realized I needed to do more promotion than what I was doing. And that's when I started interviewing people over on my page because I was like, okay, I'm going to promote them. They're going to promote me, and we're going to all work together, one big happy historical fiction family.
It
So
really, it's a wonderful side effect of that. And I know for me as well, being in the UK and having my primary audience in the US and Canada, I just felt really disconnected both from readers and then also from the historical fiction community because I left New York and then 4 months later found out I was going to be writing historical fiction. So it's sort of, I never got plugged into that world. And so I was able to meet people here and there. And you were so lovely in reaching out right at the beginning of sort of everything that was going on with lockdowns. And we had, I think I actually remember the date. I think it was April 30th. We had a panel with a few other authors, including Kristen Hormel, who I saw was watching a little bit earlier.
oh,
And
that's nice.
yeah, and it was so nice to be able to talk with other people and then to have a lovely reader response. And I just thought, I really want to do more of that because it feels like a great way to connect with people. And then it has the happy side effect of also, being a great promotional tool.
Yeah, and I've met people. I say that there is a definite silver lining to COVID for me because I never would have put myself in front of a camera as much as I have in the past year, if not for the need to do it. But also, I've met, like you say, so many great people. That panel that we did, there were 6 of us, which I thought was probably going to end up in chaos, but we all worked so well together. It was really neat. And I had another one with Kate Quinn and Pam Jenoff. Pam's coming out with a new book next week. And um, what was her name? Santa Montefiore and Jane Johnson was another out of the UK. And so I was speaking with all these people. And then I just got into speaking to one-on-one, which is easier. But I don't know, I like the pandemonium of it if we're all talking over each other. But I would never have met any of those people, not face to face anyway. Maybe through emails, but face to face, this has been a definite blessing of COVID, I would say. You and I have emailed in the past, but it wasn't until this that we got to really talk, right? Email's one thing, but being able to open up and make friendships this way is definitely a benefit.
Yeah, and I know always there's some people who say, it's so lovely seeing authors support other authors. And I think especially, we all know within our own genre, and we know people who are outside of our genre too, I'm sure, but it's just nice to have somebody else who kind of understands what it's like, sitting there and, I don't have a husband to bring me wine. I mean, that sounds great, but I do understand the feeling of sort of looking up at the end of the day and thinking, oh, oh, I've been in this world for so long. I need to, kind of re-enter society and re-enter my own life. So it's a bit of a unique experience.
It is. You get to time travel, and it sometimes it doesn't feel like work at all. A lot of the time, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're doing puzzles. I think
Yeah.
the whole thing's exciting, and sometimes I could be starving, but I will ignore it long enough that it'll go away, and then I can just keep working.
Yes, that sounds familiar. So I would love to talk a little bit about books because the happy, coincidence with doing interview shows and things like that is you get to read a lot of books and you get to read a lot of books before everybody else does. So are you, is there anything in particular that you've loved recently that's either just come out or is coming out? Or I guess could be an old book too. That's fine.
Well, I have a particular favorite that probably you guys have not heard of, and it's by a local Nova Scotia author. And it was an incredible gem for me, and I discovered it back at Christmas time. And it's by an author named Leslie Crewe, Crewe. She's from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and it's
Mhm.
called The Spoon Stealer. And it's her first historical fiction, and but she's been writing for years, all different genres. But this one, I didn't know what to expect. The publisher sent it to me to read it, and I didn't know what to expect. And I just fell in love with it. So I highly recommend that. I'm reading, now I'm going to forget the name of it, but the Women of Chateau Lafayette by
Mhm.
Stephanie Dre right now. I'm reading, let's see, I've got Kate Quinn's The Rose Code that I need to do. I'm reading, I've got Pam Janis. I've got about 6 of them that I need to get to. Kate
Sounds
Quinn,
familiar.
it was very funny. I ordered Kate Quinn's a while ago, and when it arrived, it was this thick. And I thought, that is the thickest, but how did she do that? And then I realized that I had accidentally ordered the large print version. And
Oh, oh,
which is great because my vision's bad anyway, so it's going to be great. But I looked at it and thought, how does anybody? I read Diana Gabaldon books, and those are 800 pages, but
oh
this
yeah.
was bigger. And I thought that's that. There's a book that's coming up on my list because her book is finally coming out in November. Diana Gabaldon's book, so it's been years for her. So
Mhm.
that'll be in there. But there are so many books. Kristen Harmel's book is on my list, and
Me too.
so many.
Oh, wonderful. No, it's again, it's a good problem to have and also also a little stressful when you think of all the reading that needs to get done.
It's true. It's people say to me, "You're so lucky. People send you free books when they do. It's not all the time. You guys should know. It's not all the time.
Not all the
Like
time.
when you really want one, they're usually the hardest to get. But oh, I know what else is coming out soon. The new one by AJ Pierce. She wrote Dear Mrs. Bird,
Oh,
and oh no, now I can't remember the name of it. It's coming out in August.
oh,
Oh, she's the funniest. She's so funny. She writes, it's World War II and it's set in England. And AJ Pierce, you should write her down.
wonderful.
Um, anyway, yeah, there's just so many books, and we do get some that are free because we are expected to read them and oftentimes write blurbs, which is the words in the front of them. Um, but I can't keep up. I have to keep a priority list. And also when I'm writing, I find it very difficult to read because I don't want to be influenced and I don't want to get off track. And every author has their own voice, and I tend to pick up on voices, so I don't want to lose mine while I'm working on my book. It's complicated.
It's tricky. I found I can read historical fiction while I'm writing it, although I prefer to read romance, mystery, thriller, something that's tonally very different. I cannot listen to historical fiction audiobooks when I'm writing one because it just, like you said, it clicks in and suddenly I start writing like Fiona Davis. And I mean, that's great, but I'm also not Fiona Davis, so I really need to be careful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's I should tell you one thing about audiobooks that I did an exciting thing that I think you will love. Four Letters Across the Sea, there is an audiobook. And I just for fun, I reached out to the two narrators and I said, I'd really like to interview you guys. Could we talk about the process? And so they're going to, it's May 7th, they'll be on. But
Ooh.
not only did we talk about the audiobook world, which I found amazing, because they're actors. These people are actors, but they are, behind the scenes. But I had them read a chapter together. And so my chapters are always one is male, one is female. So they alternate all through the books. But in this one, they read chapter 2, and it was Max's chapter, but whenever there was a female voice, the other actress read the part. And for me, it was like living a dream to hear all these characters come alive in their voices. So that's going to be May 7 on my Facebook page, and you might like to come hear them because it's very interesting stuff. We don't get to see that.
No, we don't. I mean, that's a complete mystery to me. And people sometimes ask, do you pick your audiobook narrator? And the answer is that the lovely people at Simon & Schuster Audio email me and say, do you like this voice? And I say,
Yeah,
sounds great. And just go from there. And
exactly.
suddenly, the book comes out and there's an audiobook version of it. So it's a mystery to me what happens in between.
Yeah, it's fun. I love listening to them though, because you can listen to your own book and get something out of it because they interpret it differently. Forgotten Home Child, actually, the narrator for the female part was Irish, which is great because Winnie is Irish, and so but she's been here a long time, so it's just a little bit of Irish, just enough. And when she does the child, she puts in a little bit more accent, and then she lets it fade as she gets older. And I love that. That just brought it alive for me.
What a wonderful detail that, again, you can only get because it's that particular format that you're listening to it in. That's so interesting.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, well, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I know that you have other things you need to be doing as well. So I do want to make sure that we have a chance to hear a little bit more about where people can find you online, where they can get your books, so that they can continue on with all of these wonderful things that you're bringing up.
Sure, I would love to share that. I when I started sharing about the book plates yesterday, somebody said, "Well, I've only read your 2 books. What are you writing next?" And I said, "Well, actually, Letters Across the Sea is my 6th book. So there's a few others. You just need to go on the website." So my website is www.genevievegraham.com, and any social media, it's just Jen Graham Author. So Facebook, Instagram. Um, I put really cute pictures of my dog on Instagram if you want to come and
Yes.
follow me for that. And um, I'm doing an Instagram live tonight with Indigo, which is the major bookstore up here.
That'll be
Uh,
fun.
so that's tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern. So that'll be fun too. But yeah, Jen Graham Author on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for answering people's questions and being so generous with your time. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
It's so good to see you, Julia. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. And I will see all of you guys next week.